Oregonian and elsewise. So these are things, you don't have to be a lawyer to move things forward, although it's great to be a lawyer or a doctor or whatever. But the meme warfare, the keyboard warriors, like getting out, collecting the data, reaching out to the journalists, doing that work. So this is really important and something that anyone can do and make a big impact. So, you know, it's really important, and I really don't like abbreviating people's talks, but we're running out of time, and I got to talk as well. And I'm scheduled for an hour. I can probably do it in a half hour. I'm not going to talk this fast, but anyway, it is my great pleasure to introduce the penultimate talk.
Eric, get the mic.
Oh.
You introduce.
Kind of ironic because I was talking about how the internet could help big time, and they didn't hear any of that. But the point is, you can make a big difference by finding media contacts, which you don't need a specialized degree or even a high school degree. Just go to the website, find the reporters, blast them with the information, and one of them will pick it up. As Daniel shared, I sent him a couple voice messages. I got reporters from the Oregonian asking me about the complaint, right? So it works. Anyway, it is my great pleasure to introduce the penultimate speaker. We are very grateful that we found our champion in Oregon, who has had significant wins and advanced the constitutional law in this state itself. He had established marriage equality in the state of Oregon prior to being a federal constitutional right. So, round of applause for that. So please, Lake Perriguey. This advances the slide. Okay. Oh no, it's okay. It should just pop back. There you go.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Eric. I'm delighted to be here. You know, I've learned so much this weekend. Before this weekend, I really knew nothing about circumcision, although I had certain ideas about it and thought it was always kind of bizarre and barbaric, and was aligned with the intersex community and thought that that was sort of kind of similar, not similar, but crossover interests. But before we begin, I just wanted to put on a little bit of skin cream. Well, foreskin. Before we start, I learned about that this weekend too. But I'm actually serious. I didn't really know about Intactivism. I'd never heard the word, so I feel very, very fortunate to have been invited to be the local counsel, to be presented with such an extraordinary complaint, and then to be given a crash course before things begin. So thank you everyone for your wonderful presentation. But I wanted to give just a little bit of a sense of what a case, my case, the marriage equality case, looked like in Oregon and how it might work, and hopefully will work here, because we established marriage equality in like 6 months in Oregon from start to finish. It went very, very quickly. And so I'm just going to give you a little bit of that history. And we're celebrating now 10 years of marriage equality. All right, so, but to give you a sense of that, it's 1993. I'm living in Austin, Texas, and I'm with a group called the Lesbian Avengers. And we had learned that the state of Texas was going to reorganize its criminal statutes and all of its statutes, because they'd gotten messy over the years and they weren't numbered correctly. And the legislators were going through all of the different laws, and they discovered that there was a law that said that they couldn't have oral sex with their wives anymore. And they're like, let's get that out of there, but let's leave that one for the gays. And so that really pissed me off and the other lesbian Avengers. So, because it was, if they're going to take it out for everyone, take it out for everyone. So we went to the state capitol and we unfurled banners from the rotunda, and that was before they searched you, before 9/11, I guess. And went to the rotunda up in the top level, and we threw paper airplanes into the legislature that were doused with fish emulsion and hair permanent solution, and the sign said, "Homophobia stinks. You say don't fuck, we say fuck you." And surprisingly, I mean, I had no idea, it was like an anti-sodomy law, right? Decriminalized in 1972. But I was surprised to determine that I, got, let's see, do I have to press it again? Busted! I was put in jail. And I was completely dumbfounded that I was actually in jail, but so sitting there overnight in the gay cell, they had a gay cell back in Austin, very liberal place, and so overnight, high thread count. So overnight, we wake up in the morning, and the doors open, and the sea of blue cops parted, and this, lesbian woman, it seemed like the first time she'd ever worn a skirt, she walked through, and she busted us out of jail, and that was awesome, and I thought, I want her power. I want to know that, and I want to help be an activist and support my friends who are in activist causes. So I applied to law school. Well, I took the LSAT and I got a brochure for Lewis and Clark here in Portland, and there were beautiful waterfalls, so I came to this school primarily to just escape the possibility that I would be sucked in by the corporate capitalist structure and end up in New York working for a bank. So I came out here to Lewis and Clark, and while I was out here, President Clinton signed the Defense of Marriage Act, which defined for federal purposes that a legal union is between one man and one woman as a husband and wife. That was very much a political decision. And so then, that was a bummer. I mean, I didn't really care that much about marriage, but it was still targeted at the gays. So I graduated from law school, and a few years later, Lawrence v. Texas, which was a Supreme Court case that said that adult consensual sex between consenting adults of the same sex, same gender, cannot be criminalized anywhere in the country. So that was amazing, and it kind of was it was the law, the very law that I was protesting in Texas. They said that law itself is unconstitutional. And that law overturned a law from 1986 called Bowers v. Hardwick, and that was a Georgia case in which the Supreme Court again was questioning whether a state can criminalize adult sex in your own bedroom, in a private place, in a hotel room, between two consenting adults. And Scalia essentially said, well, we looked through the Constitution and we didn't see the word butt fucking anywhere, so yes, you can criminalize it. Go for it, Georgia. So, he was a strict constructionalist. If the word anal sex is not in the Constitution, then go for it. Put those faggots in jail. And that's essentially what he said. But so in 2003, I'm out of law school, and it was just really exciting that the law that I was protesting is now overturned by the Supreme Court. So in Oregon, we had a law. I decided to stay in Oregon. Fewer banks. And it said marriage is a civil contract entered into by males of at least 17 age and females at least 17 years of age, otherwise capable of marriage. So then George W. Bush in 2004 kind of encourages the implementation of what are called mini DOMA laws that essentially say, put this into your state constitution, put it on the ballot while I'm running for president, and we'll get the Republicans out because we'll scare everyone to think that their kids are going to be gay and that there's going to be gay marriage and it's all going to be crazy and they maybe will vote for me at the same time. So that happened here in Oregon, and it passed by 57%. But, the voter pamphlets, we get them in Oregon. It's an initiative. You vote to change the laws. We have that in Oregon. It's not just the legislature, but individuals can vote. And if enough people vote, you can get any kind of law on the books. And so there's a voter pamphlet where you can read about it. And this one was particularly interesting in this time because it was in the news a lot about whether to ban gay marriage. And someone actually paid to put this in there. Marriage is not sacred. Marriage is for wimps and sissies. Agree with us or burn in hell. I mean, there were just so much mis and disinformation and kind of kooking us out around this time. But it did pass, and marriage was specifically limited in the Constitution between a man and a woman. But in Oregon, a lot of the people in the Portland area and Eugene and Salem are pretty progressive, and there are a lot of gay and trans people. In fact, the first trans protective laws in the United States, well, at least some of the first, were here in Multnomah County in Portland, and a lot of gay, trans, and intersex people began moving here. You know, it was kind of in the first days of the internet. A lot of trans people moved to Portland, and we protected them under city and county law very, very early. But in any event, in 2008, Oregon creates the Oregon Family Fairness Act, and essentially what it says is anybody who is same-gender marriage and any same-sex couples, they have absolutely all the same rights of marriage under state law. So it becomes then the policy of the state of Oregon to give gay and lesbian people, same-gender couples, all the same rights that straight people have, but there's still the federal question of marriage. All right. So this is brewing, and the gay rights groups, the ACLU, are figuring out how can we get marriage, and how do we bring that perfect case, and who are going to be our plaintiffs, and or should we just vote on it? And so this is brewing up, not just in Oregon, but nationwide, because there is a big equal protection question, like straight people can get married. What is the compelling or even legitimate or rational government interest to exclude gay people? That's really the constitutional question. And so then I happened to be visiting my family in DC, and I went, oh, wrong one. Let's see, how do I make it go? Okay, not going. Oh, and so I took this photograph in front of the Supreme Court that day, and I missed it, but the next day, the court decided the U.S. v. Windsor case, and that was a sweet lesbian woman and her partner. She was very old, and she was a lesbian, and it was a question about taxes. And you know, while Americans maybe used to hate gay people, they hated paying taxes more, and she won. And so the court essentially said that, you know, you can't, if a state has marriage equality, the federal government has to recognize that marriage. And so that meant that she saved a bunch of money because her wife was a rich Manhattan landowner. And many people don't know this, but if you're married, you can transfer billions of dollars to your spouse tax-free. But if you're not married and you're just a domestic partnership, there could be tax consequences on the death of your spouse, which was the case for her. And you have limitations on how much you can give in a gift to your domestic partner. So there were a lot of rights and privileges that weren't available. So around this time, I discovered that I'd come back from DC, and I discovered that the Oregon United for Marriage wanted to spend $12 million to put the question of marriage equality on the ballot. Not go to the courts, they want to go to the ballot, and they want to convince a bunch of yahoos in Eastern Oregon that gay people are okay, and you've seen enough episodes of Glee or Will and Grace, and so let's just let them have the right to please vote, vote, vote. But I fundamentally thought, I don't want all these people voting on my civil rights, because what'll happen, you know, in 5 years? Could they just take it back? And there were all these high-profile people. This is the former Governor Clopper, who was left office in a scandal because his girlfriend was living there and working for, I don't know what happened really, but he left office. And this is a former governor, and everybody's signing on for this ballot initiative, and Oregon United for Marriage raising all this money. The Blazers football team and Nike are putting their logos on it, and so it's very cool to be for marriage equality, and you know, it's good business. And this is the great, wonderful Ellen Rosenblum, my friend and former Attorney General from Oregon, and she had signed on to various amicus briefs and high-profile cases around the country related to marriage equality and gay equality going back to 1995. She was a real pioneer and made it very clear that the government's position and the Attorney General's position in the state of Oregon was for marriage equality. And so I'm watching all of this, and this is some press release from her office, and she says, Oregonians in 2004 proposed a constitutional amendment for same-sex marriage. no Oregon court has considered the kind of federal constitutional challenges to the Oregon ban that is presented in these cases. So she's sort of inviting someone, kind of, to bring a case. That's how I read it. And there she is again, publicly supporting equality. And so in my mind, I'm like, well, I'll just like sue the government, and she'll be the one that has to defend it. And she's clearly on our side. And then more vote on civil rights, vote on civil rights. And I just didn't like this idea that this was the way we're going in 2013. And so Big Gay Inc. is what I call like ACLU and, you know, the gay rights group that wants to raise $12 million and have a lot of garden parties for the next 6 months. And so, you know, you can sort of see, they say, unlike states such as Iowa and New York, Oregon does not have the option of going to court through courts or legislature. The only way to change our constitution is with the vote of the people. And so this is July 25, 2013. And I just called bullshit on that. I just knew that it was wrong. In this picture of my bathroom, I was sitting in the bathroom here reading about this, and it just hit me, and I decided I'm going to write Ellen Rosenblum and let her know that I'm going to sue the state of Oregon on alleged constitutional theory. And so this was it, July 21st, the first email. I just say, greetings, Ellen. I'd like to schedule a call with you about a potential federal challenge to Oregon's constitutional provision defining marriage. I got a little bit of pushback. The ACLU sent me a brief. People were very upset with me because this was a $12 million campaign, years in the making, and they got word that I was going to sue instead of following in the sort of inertial vision about how we win marriage equality. But I was introduced to this wonderful couple, Deanna Geiger and Janine Nelson. They've been together for 31 years, and they signed off as plaintiffs. And then Bill Greiser and Bill Dumig, married in Canada, unmarried in Oregon, so not recognized in Oregon, had 2 adopted kids. Wonderful, wonderful people. In any event, and then I found Leanne Easton, a federal practitioner, Indian lawyer, Native American law. She signed on. And we filed a complaint, much like we did just now with Intact Global and the team here. And it essentially alleges similar, marriage is a civil contract. We had a substantive due process claim, essentially saying, kind of in a way like the body autonomy claim, that fundamentally, in this case, there's a fundamental right to marriage, and then an equal protection claim similarly. At this time, Michael McShane, for one of the first openly gay federal judges appointed by Obama, just happens to get appointed as a federal judge here in Oregon. But he's stationed down in Eugene. So I filed a complaint in Eugene. Because there are only 2 judges there, and lo and behold, we got him. It was great. And around this time I'm looking, and the state of New Mexico, they decided, I'm from New Mexico, and they decided a marriage equality case under state law. And what was unique about them is that they didn't describe it as same-sex law. They used the construction same-gender law, which I thought was very interesting. I called the lawyer for the plaintiffs and said, did you do this? It was Shannon Minter from the Lesbian Rights Project in San Francisco. She's like, I don't know where they got it, but that was great. I thought that was progressive and kind of forward-thinking. So I used that construction in all of my briefing to the court here. And then Basic Rights Oregon and the ACLU, upset with me for disrupting their advertising $12 million campaign, they joined our lawsuit and they found 2 plaintiffs. This guy then became, and he was their plaintiff, the tall guy then became a very right-wing conspiracy theorist, maybe not conspiracy theorist, but very right-wing Republican legislator after all of this ended. But in any event, after Basic Rights Oregon and the ACLU joined our lawsuit, their donate button changed. Because we saw on July 25th it was, we can't do it in the courts. But 6 months later, on December 19th, they say, with a parallel strategy of a ballot measure campaign as well as a case in court, we will win this, still with the same donate button there. So I filed the case, and then in Utah, the court there recognized marriage equality. And meanwhile, in our court, we're just filing a motion for summary judgment, which is essentially saying, hey, all of these facts are agreed, the law is very clear, we don't need a trial, just give us marriage equality. So around this time, there was an intervener. This guy, wedding crasher, John Eastman from the National Organization for Marriage, he came in and he said, hey, Ellen Rosenblum for the state, she and Lake are buddies and they're colluding, and you should let me come in because we really need to have a trial on all of these issues. And the court essentially said, get out of here, you can't stand in her pumps. Ellen Rosenblum is here, and it turns out she's the only attorney general in the marriage equality movement, the only head of the government who argues from a legal perspective for state government. She's the only attorney general that stood up, went to court, and said, hey, I agree with the plaintiffs. There's no constitutional justification for this ban. Unlike Kamala Harris and some other, all the other attorney generals who just didn't go to court. So I really appreciate that Aaron did that. In any event, the judge sent John Eastman packing and said, go back. And he litigated all of that all the way to the Supreme Court, saying he should have been able to come into the Oregon case, and he wasn't. And in case that guy looked familiar, that's the same John Eastman that worked in with Trump to try to throw the election. In any event, so we did our case. We had our summary judgment on April 23rd. Great little, PR. That was from a local magazine. In any event, we had a legal double helix theory that Supreme Court refers to marriage as a fundamental right 17 times in different cases, and the state must have a compelling justification if it's going to limit a fundamental right to certain classes of people. And then it's an equal protection argument that there's gender equity and sexual orientation, and you're offering pancakes to one group of people but not to the other, so unconstitutional. And so, we had press junkets and all of that. And then on May 19th, Judge McShane ruled, and he used the construction that I advanced, same gender couples are entitled to equal protection of their fundamental right to marriage. And so that was May 19th, 2014, so May 19th, 10 years ago last year. And then we had a wonderful party and dancing, and I brought my clients some bouquets, and they look happy. That's the county offices that, for the first time, doing legal marriage and birth certificate. Just in terms of the way that I practice law, I like to be gracious and kind, and there was some animosity between myself and the organization that wanted to do it with this big vote. And so when the case was over, I worked with a jewelry designer, and I designed these little rings with Oregon in the center and an equal sign over Portland, and then on the back it has the date of the decision, and I sent them out to all the people, even on the people who were upset with me for doing it, and the judge, and it sits now in the judge's chambers. And interestingly enough, that judge was going to recuse himself, and his clerk said, what do you mean? You're a federal judge. This is your job. And because he was gay and he was new in town, but he was convinced to do it, and it was wonderful. So then later, marriage equality, yeah, there it is. But it was nice. And everybody, at the end, it was great that we all got to be part of the win, including the larger organizations, because sometimes people access civil rights through donating money, and then they get information. And so it was wonderful when it was just my case, but then they came in, they were a great legal team. One was from Perkins Coie, targeted by Trump recently. But to have more people at the table, and then more people associated with those people at the table, it just meant that there were many, many people who were part of the win, just like when we win in Oregon. All of you will be part of the win, and we'll just be the people sitting at council table. And so then marriage equality went nationwide on June 26, 2015. And so then that was great. And then about 2 years later, I was approached by someone named Jamie Shoup who wanted to identify as non-binary, and there hadn't really been a legal recognition by a state for the non-binary gender category. And so Jamie asked me to do that, and we successfully did that here in Oregon. We were the first state to give the X on the driver's license. And kind of went nationwide, and on that one, all I did was file a simple paper in the circuit court, and then I called up the governor and said, hey, I did this, and then I called up the attorney general, I said, hey, I did this, and I'm like, you need to change all the systems at the DMV, and so that took about 9 months because it was a very, very old system, but I didn't get any pushback, and this was before the Trump administration was villainizing trans people as a way to, I don't know, focus on other things and get people into their cause. But in any event, there was no resistance, and in fact, the government was quite supportive in changing the DMV registration and the other administrative rules associated with having a third gender identified on those documents. So I show you this just sort of show you how a legal case can work, and it worked very quickly and very efficiently, and a large part of it had to do, I think, with that it was time, and also sort of the approach that we took with the government. So I don't know what's going to happen here, although I have spoken with the head of the trial division for the Department of Justice and sent her a courtesy copy of the complaint. She said thanks. And we have a new attorney general, though, in Oregon. Not really clear what his positions are on a lot of things yet because he was just elected. But I look forward to working so much to working with this wonderful team, and hope that I can bring this kind of success efficiently to this cause as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate the background, the success, and we hope this is replicated for children here in the state of Oregon. So we've got 15 minutes left. I have an hour talk, but I was wondering, how am I going to fill an hour? Well, realistically, it's not an hour long, and some of it's duplicate anyways. I'm going to take the hot mic from you. Great job there. But before we begin, we have a very important announcement from Intact Global's treasurer to try to solicit financial support.
Thank you. Well, Lake is a hard act to follow, isn't he? He's only a talented lawyer, he's a stand-up comedian. If you're still with us on the stream, and if you've been here for 2 days now, and you've heard the kind of speakers I've heard, you deeply care about this issue. So we would ask you to think about supporting our effort. For those who are following the stream, go now to intactglobal.org, hit support, and under support, hit donations. You have a choice of giving a one-time donation. You can donate monthly, as we've suggested in the past. You can donate $100, $50, $10, if that's what you can afford. It's so important for us to build that sustaining group of funders for this organization to succeed. And I'll borrow a slogan from Emily's list. Early money is like yeast. Be an inaugural donor. Support us so that we can start this legislation, so that we can begin to build an organization that represents all of us in this room. So thank you, and thank you.
And if the IRS is watching, Joe meant start this litigation, not legislation. So anyway. Here, can I give this to you, Sam, to hold on to? So now, we made it through 2 full days. I got a final talk. It's not going to take an hour, and they're going to charge us overtime if we go past 6:30. So, but my talk is going to be actually a natural continuation of Lake's talk, to an extent, and how we go from the success of the marriage equality movement to the success of the bodily and genital autonomy movement, right? Everybody gets to make these important decisions about their bodies, and we're protecting children from harm. So let me pull up the last slideshow of the conference. I mean, and then we're not done because we got the press conference tomorrow, but. So, the last talk is called The Future of Intactivism. We started with the state of intactivism. Where are we? Is the circumcision rate 50%? Is it 70%? Yeah, it's pretty high. It's higher than it can be and it should be, right? And what are the strategies that we can do to get this circumcision rate to a point where really not a minuscule number of boys are genitally cut, and intersex individuals and females. Well, thankfully, very few girls are cut in this country. So we're somewhere around here in that 50 to 60, maybe even higher, and it's regional. We're going to talk about this. And Oregon has one of the lowest rates of genital cutting in the country, which is great. Great place to start. You guys are already way ahead of the game, and we're just here to circle the square and protect all children instead of 9 out of 10 children from genital cutting, right? So again, Intact Global, this organization, our main goal is to make male genital mutilation a mainstream issue, right? How do we protect all children from genital mutilation? We got 2 different types of strategies, at least with this corporation. We have the legal strategy, right? Equal protection lawsuits, what we filed a few days ago out of Perriguey, Oregon, with the help of Lake Perriguey. And then we also have Medicaid defunding lawsuits, which I'll touch on, and tort lawsuits, like, oh, this doctor performed a negligent circumcision, or these doctors are defrauding Medicaid by saying, oh, this doctor has some pathological condition, even though he's totally healthy. That would be fraud against Medicaid. And that is a potential legal theory we could pursue, but as I'll discuss, litigation is expensive and we have to allocate our resources in the most efficient way possible to protect as many children as possible in as short a time as possible. So you get the point. And then we have also grassroots, right? Social media, podcasts, I'm not sure if anyone mentioned him during this conference, but the biggest podcaster in the world called Circumcision Dick Mutilation. Joe Rogan's like all about it. And, but there's a bunch of other podcasters who are really hardcore against this. And legacy media, at least in the US, has not been that friendly to our position. So, but most people watch alternative media now. So, the landscape has shifted radically. And yeah, just talking about MGM, right? Oh, you see someone who's pregnant, as Michelle said. Say, look, let me tell you something important. You want to protect your child. You want to protect him from harm or her from harm. Well, don't cut off part of their body, right? Respect their bodily integrity. So, as mentioned, we're focusing on, in Oregon, equal protection lawsuits. Now, a great question came up earlier. Tina asked, oh, circumcision rate's been 50, 60% for a long time. What makes you think that you can have this dramatic reduction in genital cutting of children? I mean, which Oregon's already done, but on a national scale. Why would you think that? How is that possible? You've been at 50% for so long, or whatever, around there. Well, if we look at other progressive causes, and this is from a Bloomberg article, 2015 Bloomberg article, what you can see is, the x-axis is time, and this is the number of states in the U.S., right? Excuse my laser pointer. In the beginning, interracial marriage, there was only a handful of states. As high as the bar is how many states have allowed interracial marriage. Then we had a stagnation for a while, a bunch of states, stagnation, a whole bunch of states, and then the Loving v. Virginia case, right? And so all this other states, it's like, okay, you're coming with us whether you want to or not. We're going to end this abjectly wrong practice, right? And we have to remember, what is Loving v. Virginia? Yeah, it sounds great, but this is actual people saying, look, this is wrong what happened to me. We want to be able to marry the people that we love, and I know fundamentally that race should not be a barrier to that. We're all human, right? And similarly, there's also, you can amend the Constitution, the 19th Amendment, allowing women's suffrage. And look, no states had women's suffrage, then one had it, that little bump, then 2, then, I don't know, maybe 5, then a whole bunch of states ratified it, and then they're like, you know what, we're going to make this a constitutional amendment. Everybody does it, no question. Well, and then we have the most recent constitutional rights issue that Lake established in the state of Oregon. So another round of applause for Lake. That's pretty and again, and that culminated in the Obergefell case 2015 in the United States Supreme Court, but it didn't start there, right? It started with that little bump. Anyone know that state? Massachusetts, baby, that's absolutely right. Jay, yeah, you know it. So I'm from Massachusetts. I'm very proud of Massachusetts for saying, look, in 2003, they established marriage equality. So I'm very proud of that, and the Goodrich case. So I want to talk about marriage equality because that was without a doubt an extremely successful movement, and they did that in an incredibly short period of time. Look at this extreme rate of progress is what that is. And that's something that could be achieved with the Intactivist movement if we deploy our resources strategically. And we also need fundraising, of course. The more resources we have, the more shots we can take. And we've done a lot with $30,000, as I'll talk with. But anyway, let's focus on marriage equality real quick. As I mentioned before, Massachusetts was the first state. And here are the 14 plaintiffs in Massachusetts. They were victorious in establishing this constitutional right in the state, not the federal constitutional right, in 2003. This was after they won. And then we have a whole bunch of states coming in, and then we have like 10 states and 20 states. And right here is the state of Oregon. As we saw, the Giger v. Kitzhaber case, Oregon 2014. And they had very competent counsel, Leanne Easton, and this handsome gentleman right here, Lake, back 10 years ago. And then it culminated, all these states were saying, okay, we're going to respect people's constitutional right to marriage equality. And the Supreme Court's like, okay, this is too confusing now. Even if we're conservative, we're going to give the national win. And obviously the court is more conservative now than it was. But that was the progression. It was state by state. It wasn't just, oh, we challenge a federal law and then everyone is on board. You have to do this on a step-by-step basis. And we've already filed the first step here in Oregon, right? And we're hoping for, if we get that first step, maybe we get the second step, maybe we get the third, and then maybe we get some type of progress where we get 10 steps, we get 20 steps, and then every child in the nation is entitled to their constitutional right to bodily integrity, right? And that's a very possible outcome. It's happened in the immediate past, and it could happen in the immediate future. We just need to be effective and organized and file this type of strategic impact litigation. So I want to focus on the tail end of this graph. This was published in 2015. This last little bump right here, that's legal cannabis. Obviously a different state. It was legal in 4 states in 2015, but by current day, it's legalized in about 24 states recreationally, and that goes up to 39 if you include medicinal use. And Biden issued, I think, an executive order saying, look, we're just not going to prosecute this. So that's a huge momentous win. I mean, it's not outright legal, but if you're an advocate for legal cannabis, and we have some individuals who actually use cannabis to treat cancer patients in the audience, like Brian Turner, so who actually brought this litigation to Oregon. So now I'm bringing the connection. A little round of applause for Brian. This is the progression, but this is not just a hypothetical. This is what has happened in other human rights, social rights, civil rights movements, is we've already filed in Oregon, and it's very possible, as Zenas was saying, and I appreciate it, that this was, one of the strongest complaints that really lays out the human rights violation, the civil rights violation that is medically unnecessary, non-religious genital cutting, right? It is really on its face an obvious violation of a person's right to bodily integrity, to decide what happens to their own body, to experience what God or the universe has given us, whatever your beliefs may be. And it deprives an individual of maybe deciding for themselves or their selves how they want, whether they want to subscribe to a religion, which we're not dealing with right now. So anyway, we filed the Oregon lawsuit, but it is very, very conceivable with the stellar team we have, Peter Adler and Samar Safarini, and maybe Lake will join us in other states. We'll see if we can convince him. But that we could file, maybe file 3 similar lawsuits in the next year, or maybe 5 lawsuits in the next year. You never know, right? And it depends. Do we get the funding? Do we get the plaintiffs who are watching? Can we find the local counsel? And there's a lot of lawyers who really believe in the equal rights of all children, right? And all people. Like when I was at Georgetown Law, I had an incredible amount of support from my student body and professors who were like, gung-ho, yeah, we should stop cutting our children. That's totally nuts. So this is not it's a mainstream view in the world, but it is a minority view in the United States I should say, it's a mainstream view in the world to not cut children, but we're still catching up in the US, but it's different regionally. We're going to talk about that. And so how do we get these? Remember, these steps are how many states would, potentially say equal protection under the law is a constitutional right, equal protection under the law from the harm of genital cutting. So again, legal action. We had the Loving v. Virginia with interracial marriage. We have the Obergefell v. Hodges to establish the constitutional right of marriage equality. And we've got better pictures coming up, but we have the Hadachek v. Oregon case in 2025. So, I mean, really, it should be listened to. And so, beyond just Oregon being a low rate of genital cutting, why else is it a great place to start? Well, the Oregon Supreme Court is the authority on what the Oregon Constitution means, right? And the Oregon Supreme Court had the opportunity to address the, genital cutting. Is that an appropriate procedure? Should it be done to children? And there was a custody dispute, and actually Bradley Leckman Sue, who was involved in protecting the child, was here earlier. But anyway, the Supreme Court Justice Paul J. Dominguez said in the Bolt v. Bolt decision, and this was 16 years ago, circumcision is an invasive medical procedure that results in permanent physical alteration of a body part and has attendant medical risks. I mean, that's a pretty damning statement. Look, this is an invasion of a child's body, right? And it risks serious complications, bleedings, infections, loss of not just the foreskin, which is important in and of itself, but the glands. Babies have literally died in Oregon from medically unnecessary surgery. So, I mean, there's serious risks, including the risk of death. But in that case, the court didn't have to decide which side presented a more persuasive case regarding the medical risks or benefits. And as Martin said, that's not the right scale. It's advantages versus disadvantages. The advantages of having your human and civil right to bodily integrity respected, the advantage of being intact and having all the functions of this body part that's evolved over millions of years. The disadvantage of the immediate trauma, of the lifelong psychological and other scarring and loss of function. So the court may not have had Martin to write an amicus brief at the time, but we did have amicus briefs from John and they prevailed. So round of applause for John, guys. You guys staying with us because we are here. We're running out of time, but we're going to get through this talk. So again, now the court may not have had the opportunity to address the advantages and disadvantages of the genital cutting of minors in the Bolt v. Bolt case, but it is squarely on the table for the court to address the substantive issues in the Hadachek v. Oregon case. So round of applause for Dane, who took this stand. And really a legend. 17 years old, so I worked with me. There's nothing allowed to happen to other kids in this state and certainly across the U.S., and that's where we're going. And of course, round of applause for his parents, Cecil and Sierra, as well. I mean, seriously, these other parents do this as well. I'm going to expose myself and say, look, I'm going to be on the front lines of protecting kids, and we all really appreciate your sacrifice and your courage. And great news, I've said this many times, but the complaint was filed March 27th. It has a case number, and you can download it at intactglobal.org. There's buttons all over the place. Now, if you can also go to the Multnomah Circuit Court and find it. That takes a lot more work, right? Unless you're a lawyer, and even then, it's the same document. So we've got a stellar legal team. We're very lucky. So the author, so the complaint was originally drafted by Peter Adler, who was a law professor at University of Vermont, University of Massachusetts, got his law degree at University of Virginia, as well as Samus Affarini, who is a current University of Virginia law student. So a lot of University of Virginia where the revolution occurred, right? The American Revolution. So really going back to our roots. And then we have Lake Perriguey, who advanced the constitutional rights of citizens in this state already, and then yours truly. So we've got a really strong legal team, a very strong legal team. I bet on this legal team, and I appreciate you all betting on us as well, including Sierra Cecil. Thank you so much. So we're really stoked. We're very confident in our team. And the complaint speaks for itself, as other lawyers have read and testified to. So. Again, so the key strategies, we want to make male genital mutilation mutilation a mainstream issue. This was the legal and grassroots strategies that Intact Global is using, and the How to Check the Oregon, that's at the top of the list, right? This is our vanguard initiative. We're very optimistic about it, and win or lose, and we hope to win, and we think that's very possible, if not likely. We're going to keep pushing and do whatever it takes to protect these kids from genital cutting, because they're the most vulnerable among us, and they're really relying on us. So why is Oregon a great place to start? Right. Well, it has specific constitutional provisions because I know it can get confusing, and Zenas had mentioned the difference between state and federal law. Well, we have federal law that applies to every state, and then we have state law that applies just to that particular state. We also have a constitution, a federal constitution that we're all familiar with, that we fight about on national news, the First Amendment, free speech, Second Amendment, guns. But each state has its own constitution as well. And I had no intention to be a lawyer until, I got into a dispute with my previous employer. And so, I actually didn't know that states had their own constitutions, and so that's why I say it, because, I had a physics degree, so it's not like I didn't go to school, it's just nobody told me this in school. So each state has their own constitution, and each state law needs to comply with that constitution, right? If it violates any principles in that state constitution, then a court can strike that. And so Oregon in particular has an equal protection clause, which says you cannot give certain privileges and immunities to one class of citizens and not all citizens. And that has been interpreted by the Oregon Supreme Court, right? The body who has the authority to determine what that constitution means, to include sex. So you can't discriminate on the basis of sex because of the equal protection clause. But that wasn't enough for the people of Oregon. So in 2014, the people of Oregon said, you know what, it's great we have this equal protection clause, you can't discriminate on the basis of sex, but just to remove any ambiguity at all, we want to pass a specific amendment that prohibits sex-based discrimination. So it's really on the point. You cannot discriminate on the basis of sex. It is a fundamental principle the people of Oregon voted for, and the reality, which is wonderful. But the reality is, the law that we're challenging in the How to Check the Oregon case is the anti-FGM law, which is great that we protect children, or female children, from female genital mutilation, but on its face, it discriminates on the basis of sex. It only protects female children. It doesn't protect all children equally. I mean, this is not rocket science. This is like a really simple argument. And so in 1999, from effective lobbying from women's rights groups, and we're grateful for, and we can learn a lot from, they passed the anti-FGM law. And what that did is it criminalized all non-medically necessary genital cutting, but only for children, only for female children, excuse me. And the purpose, the state legislature said when it passed this law, it said, look, FGM is already illegal in our state because of assault, battery laws, you name it, child abuse. But we want, just like Oregon passed the Equal Rights Amendment to expressly codify the prohibition of sex-based discrimination, it also passed the anti-FGM law to expressly codify, or criminalize, I should say, the genital cutting of female minors, right? And that's a good thing because we want to protect females from genital cutting, but the reality is we want to protect all children. There's no reason we should just protect one group of children. Let's protect them all equally. It's 2025, and it's time we face the elephant in the room and say, look guys, we got to protect these kids. They're screaming and writhing in pain. And you have adults like me, I'm a Jewish American, who says, look, what you did to me was wrong. I'm an adult. Like, we can look at the evidence, we can experience it. Our lived experiences as well as the evidence is overwhelming. I mean, we're a total outlier in the world. So I'm going to just go into the legal theory a little of the How to Check the Oregon case. If you want to read the 72 page, excuse me, complaint, don't forget that last page. I really encourage you to. It's very clear. It's got an index. It's got great citation. We had a great team to put it together. But what the Supreme Court said when it's determining whether or not a statute, let's say, violates that Equal Protection Amendment, or the Equal Protection Clause, or the Equal Rights Amendment, says laws that discriminate based on sex are only valid if they're justified by specific biological differences between men and women. specific biological differences, and that bar is extremely high because, as Oregon courts have discussed, because they're the ones who determine what's constitutional or not, they said, look, the laws that affect sperm and egg donors, they cannot be different, despite how differently the gametes are of the sexes, right? And so if you can't treat individual, like laws that regarding the gametes of the sexes differently, then what about homologous or even analogous structures? So it's important we talk just real briefly, like what are we talking about when we're talking about let's not cut the genitals of children? Well, if you look in utero, so like, the fetus in the womb, what you can see is at 5 to 7 weeks, the genitals are indistinguishable, right? They come from the same structures, the same embryonic structures, and depending on the bath of hormones, you get the external male or female genitalia. Obviously, there's natural and normal variations in between, and we want to protect intersex children too. But 9 to 14 weeks, the genitals still look very similar, and then at birth, you have the external genitalia we're mostly familiar with. Now, not a great picture. This is a better picture here, the external genitalia of adults. And what we're talking about right now is the prepuce, right, with the foreskin. Right now, which has sexual and protective functions, and removing it is extremely painful and risks incredible complications, bleeding, infections, death, erectile dysfunction, pain with erections, you name it. And so, right now, what we're going to be asking the court is, what are the specific biological differences between these two pieces of tissue that makes it totally illegal and a felony to cut and remove this part for no medical reason, but absolutely okay to cut and remove this part, except the fact that the male foreskin is much larger and much more densely innervated, right? Now, the clitoris of the female is much more densely innervated than the glands of the male. So, I mean, they're homologous, but arguably, the foreskin has a lot more sensory tissue than the female prepuce, and it's a felony to cut the female prepuce. So that's a really difficult question we're posing for the courts. And the answer is, the intent of the legislature in 1999 was great to protect females, but it's a logical and constitutional extension to protect all children. It's really where the whole world is going. The global medical and bioethical community, there's an emerging consensus. And so, as I mentioned, the lawsuit asks, okay, what specific biological differences justify this treatment? And there's different types of genital cutting if you want to get real deep into it, and if you're at this conference, you probably have. but in terms of female genital mutilation, all of the different types, and it gets more and more extreme, are unlawful and a felony. So we can't remove the clitoral hood, we can't remove the clitoris, or the clitoris and labia, or really grisly infibulation, which I'm not going to describe, but we already agree that the top level is illegal, so we're not going to get into the graphic details of how you can mutilate an infant. But unfortunately, it's infant genital mutilation in Oregon and every state in the U.S. remains legal for no medical reason. And so we use a euphemism, circumcision, but at the end of the day, it denudes the penis and removes a lot of function and sensory tissue. Now, you can't cut off the glands of an infant, although that happens at times because an infant's penis is really small and you're not really sure what you're cutting, right? You can't communicate, and then castration is illegal as well. So there are 3 outcomes to this lawsuit, and we're really hoping for the best outcome. And if we get the worst outcome, we keep pushing, and it is what it is, right? You didn't establish marriage equality the first time that you fought. I think when it came in the 1970s, and I'm sure you're more familiar than I, the Supreme Court said, look, this isn't even a question of law. Why would we even discuss or think or conceive of same-sex marriage? And then in 2015 on Burgerfeld, they say it's a fundamental constitutional right. So things change, right? Culture evolves, our understanding of human rights and human dignity evolves, and we really believe it is time that we afford that same level of dignity to have the right to your entire body to all children equally, right? It's great that we give that to girls, it's necessary and important, but it's also necessary and important that we extend that protection to all children. So the best outcome is the circuit court or maybe an appellate court reads the complaint, reads the arguments, hears oral argument, and says, you know what, we agree with you. The Hadachek plaintiffs have been harmed. They've suffered serious harm, just like many people who've undergone medically unnecessary genital cutting. And so the court essentially extends the anti-FGM law potentially to protect all children. And there is precedent in Oregon of doing that, is to correct an under-inclusive law and to extend the protection to all children. So that is a real outcome, and that would be a very brave and constitutionally just outcome. I'm not saying it will happen, but we are certainly urging the court to do that. And just the way that our constitutional law is structured, religious practices, I mentioned this before, fall under a different category of constitutional jurisprudence. So the court could sidestep the religious issue altogether, and as we discussed earlier, it's a real small fraction of genital cutting in the US that is religiously motivated. So why are we gonna, I mean, this is unfortunate, but why sink a winning initiative to, it's just a pragmatic move, is to say, look, we need to protect the children we can instead of protecting no children at all, right? And that's a sad reality that we have to face if we're gonna move forward in the immediate future. Another thing that could happen in the How to Check v. Oregon is the court could read it and say, look, we agree, it violates the Equal Rights Clause, the Equal Rights Amendment, and it is unconstitutional to only protect one class of children. And again, this is not rocket science. There's an express prohibition on sex-based discrimination, and the law is literally called an anti-female genital mutilation law. If it was called an anti-child genital mutilation law, that would be constitutionally sound. It's as simple as that. Yeah, we've got a lot of cultural baggage and inertia and ignorance to work through, but Oregon's already worked through like the vast majority. As I mentioned, 9 out of 10 kids, when you're including girls, are not generally cut in this state. So this is not like some radical change in culture in Oregon. It would be Oregon leading the charge of children's rights in the US. And we believe that Oregon's a great place to do that, and the How to Checks are great representative plaintiffs to move that forward. But what may happen if the court says, you know what, the anti-FGM law is unconstitutional because it discriminates on the basis of sex, that law can get kicked to the Oregon State Legislature, and then they have to amend the law or strike it, right? And the easiest amendment could be, look, we're going to protect all children equally. And if religious cohorts are going to get up in arms, you can create religious exemptions. There are religious exemptions in other parts of the law as well, and the sky doesn't fall down. And then the last part, and we heard from Zenas earlier about this, is you get dismissed for standing. Oh, you weren't harmed, you don't have the right to bring this. Well, Oregon specifically has statutes that we're suing under, 2 of them, 28.020 and I can't remember the other number, but essentially the first one that I mentioned, it gives you standing if your rights are violated by a statute that violates the constitutional provision. You can get what's called declaratory relief, right? Which means a judge declares that you were harmed and that this statute violates the Constitution, and that violation harmed you. So essentially, if this statute were gender neutral, protected all children equally, you wouldn't have suffered that harm. And 30 years ago, when Zenas brought this case, we were in a very different place. And also North Dakota is a very different state. I mean, we have an entire generation, if not more than a generation, and a very progressive vanguard state for children's and other individuals' rights and bodily autonomy. So it's a different game at this point. And so the opposition, and it may not be the state may agree with us, but I anticipate there may be some amicus briefs on the other side, I could be wrong, but the only argument for specific biological differences is maybe the health benefits that male genital mutilation has. But the American Academy of Pediatrics has actually made the decision to, I wouldn't say affirmatively retract, but passively retract their very weak, let's say the benefits outweigh the risk, which is the wrong scale, because that expired in 2017 and they made the decision not to renew it. Because the reality is that exposed them to legal liability because it is an indefensible position. So, I mean, the conversation has moved that circumcision was not independently associated with the risk of acquiring HIV. And if you look at America versus Europe, we're circumcising, they keep their kids intact, they don't mutilate them at birth. We have higher rates of HIV, so it's not really a coherent statement. And infants aren't at risk at HIV, or certainly not sexually at risk at HIV, maybe through breast milk, but the argument is, if you're circumcised, well, you have less risk of acquiring HIV through through sexual intercourse. Well, that doesn't make sense for babies, and they can make their own decisions, and we can respect their bodily autonomy, even if it were true. But we're also in kind of, we could be in endgame territory for a couple of reasons. So the medical evidence, and as people have mentioned, it used to be circumcision used to be a cure for masturbation. Then it was tuberculosis, then it was syphilis, and then it was HIV. And all of those, it's a problem searching for a solution, right? It's just a problem. It's child abuse, you're removing important parts of a baby, they're writhing in pain, and some of them die. And so on, but the medical industry gets to charge for it, and that's really the pushing force there. But I would like to say protecting children from harm is a nonpartisan issue. You could argue, oh, it's a bipartisan. I think it's a nonpartisan. It's really beyond politics. We just want to protect our kids, right? But using the language of the time, you could argue it's a bipartisan, and we could look at both sides. Like AOC talks about bodily autonomy is an inalienable right, and your bodily autonomy belongs to you. And I'm sure she would agree, maybe in concept, that everyone deserves a right to bodily autonomy. But it's not just the left, it's also the right. I mean, RFK Jr., as I mentioned before, he really could be the godsend of this movement in that he just defunds it. Just like other nations who've defunded it, they just stopped cutting their kids because there's no money behind it anymore, right? And RFK Jr. said, some of the possible factors we will investigate were formerly taboo or insufficiently scrutinized. Nothing is going to be off limits, right? And I know some activists who are in touch, who are in personal contact with RFK Jr., and we're hoping that they get his ear and really kind of explain, look, you want to save costs? Well, save costs by cutting medically unnecessary surgeries that harm children. I mean, it's the easiest solution to the current political agenda of cost saving. Putting aside protecting children, which we should all be on board of, and at least I would say ideologically on board of. And even our religious friends too want to protect children. They just might need to be educated on the issues, which is why it was so important that Perriguey came and said, look, these are the undisputed facts. This is important. It's a normal body part. It injures the child, right? Because a lot of people in religious communities, I'm a Jewish American, just don't know that, right? But not just American politics, but international momentum is on our side as well, right? As mentioned, most European health systems, nationalized healthcare, they don't fund male genital mutilation. They don't fund elective, cosmetic, medically unnecessary circumcision, especially on children. And the conversation in Europe isn't, oh, should we fund cosmetic circumcision on children or should we not? It's, should we outright ban it altogether, including religious genital mutilation? That's what Europe is talking about right now. So our proposal is actually quite moderate. And total bans were considered in Iceland and Denmark and Norway between 2012 and 2018. America came in and, including the ADL, and exerted pressure to kind of economic pressure and other pressure to get them to retract those. But I think something like 80% of Danes want to make genital cutting of children illegal. I mean, when do you get 80% of the population to agree on anything? But protecting children from this obvious harm is one of those things. And so our position right now at Intact Global is not that we need to do an outright ban, but that we should defund circumcision. It should be rarely done for secular reasons. And that we are the moderates in the room, right? Moderates on the global scale, moderates in Oregon. This is not some radical position. We're all, and you've heard from about maybe 10 plus lawyers, doctors, other individuals, activists, accomplished people to say, look, we're here to protect all children. This is a serious issue. And unfortunately, we're still dealing with this problem in 2025. But just like marriage equality, remember that rate of change, it could be dramatic, right? But we need the resources to do that, and I will talk about that. And Oregon is a special case in the US, so yes, male genital mutilation is practically absent in the developed world for non-religious reasons. And the data that my team was able to find was about 40% at the turn of the century, down to probably approaching 20. This was 13 years ago too. So the data is not, there's no systemic way to collect the data, so it's hard to tell how many people are circumcised. And if you look around the locker room, that may not be indicative because, as Martin Navoa was saying, some hospitals have 90% because their policy is to bill, baby. Whereas other hospitals say our policy is to not perform medically unnecessary surgeries, which which would be consistent with the Hippocratic Oath, but it may harm the bottom line. And so what litigators can do, and this is another potential strategy, but again, we have to allocate our resources strategically, is we could sue doctors for defrauding Medicaid. To say, look, oh, this infant has pathological phimosis when it's a totally healthy body part, and then billing state Medicaid for it. That would be called fraud because they're issuing a false diagnosis to get public money. And so why that could be useful is it would, if it is not profitable for doctors to cut children, then they're going to stop in droves, right? So those are other things we can do, but doctors hire big law firms, which are not better than us, but they have more resources, they can throw more people and more stuff on the wall, and it just costs more money to fight, right? So again, it looks like the problem is going to solve itself, and in Oregon, maybe it would, and we're here to just circle the square, as we say. 9 out of 10 children, including girls, are not generally cut. But if you look at the U.S. as a whole, and this is a heat map, Oregon is doing great with very low rates of circumcision, but the Midwest, the Northeast, some parts of the South, they have very high rates of circumcision. What is that? Some of them are 80%, right? So this is a safe haven. Oregon is a safe haven for children, right? They predominantly have their human right, their civil right to bodily integrity protected at birth. Now, obviously, sometimes parents are misled with inaccurate information, unfortunately, like early plaintiffs, but the reality is most children are protected here in Oregon, but most are not protected in the United States. And if we zoom out a little more, what we can see is the vast majority of the world does not generally cut their children. This was 10 years ago. Canada's much lower now, but Central America, South America, Europe, most of Asia, Australia, New Zealand, Southeast Asia as a Muslim thing, Africa as a tribal thing, Middle East as a religious thing, but in terms of medically unnecessary, non-religious genital cutting, we are the 800-pound gorilla, and there's really not any other gorillas left. And so we really, and when you're making change, remember that graph before, you don't change this whole continent, essentially, or United States, one at a time. You do it at once, you do one state at a time. Right? That's why we're assuming the state of Oregon, assuming a state statute with a state constitution. And we can scale this quite easily, but we do need resources. We're able to do this with $30,000, right? This conference, this litigation, the lawyers, haven't really been paid, but that's okay because this is so important, but we can't scale this, we can't carry this weight more than Oregon. It's just not economically feasible. So if internet, live stream, people watching the recording, if you want to see more of this, then we need donations. So go to intactlocal.org and support our work, right? Because we have a real plan and we're already doing it with what we have. But if we have more, we can do a lot more. And social rights movements, as you've seen, they're not linear, they're exponential, right? So every dollar helps more than the last dollar. It really is that important. Now, these equal protection clause or equal protection challenges are really important, and they could really establish equal protection under the law from children in Oregon and then other states. But there's other types of lawsuits, and Peter Adler talked about this. You may have a bunch of different claims if you're generally cut for no medical reason, right? But one of the other types of lawsuits that we could bring is suing Medicaid for literally wasting taxpayer dollars, because the vast majority of human beings who've ever lived have never had their genitals cut and haven't had problems by being intact, right? And so a lot of states say you can only fund things that are quote unquote medically necessary. And Sammer contrasted two statutes in Oregon and Virginia, right? In Virginia it said, oh, if it's experimental, it's not medically necessary. In Oregon it says you need to have a problem, right? A congenital defect, an injury, something that's not working. So in Oregon, it's not medically necessary. And in fact, Oregon has defunded circumcision decades ago. But in Virginia, circumcision under that would fall under that definition. So anyway, over a dozen states have ended Medicaid coverage, and what we've seen, and Martin talked about this, there's actually more dramatic states and other more dramatic drops in other states, but when Colorado defunded circumcision, we had a slow drop going here. And then when Florida defunded circumcision here, you could see the rates of circumcision on the y-axis drop. And as Shay said, And I just mentioned as well, this is not like, oh, we're just gonna go slowly to 0 or just to the religious genital cutting. It's once you get to the quarter to the third who agree with you, then everyone's like, oh yeah, we don't do that anymore. And John Geisinger, who's from New Zealand, we say woke up one day in New Zealand and say, oh yeah, we just don't do that anymore, right?
Yeah, it's like a Wednesday afternoon.
Yeah, like oh yeah, we're gonna stop. And that could happen in Oregon, it could happen in other states, and once maybe a quarter of states do it, like we saw it was actually more than a quarter states in the Obergefell case, but when a certain threshold of states do it, then the federal government says, you know what, we're just gonna protect all children. You're not gonna be vulnerable to having your genitals cut or mutilated because you were born in New York, for example. And we have some great work being done by Tony LaSquadros. Where is he? Oh, there he is, from Intaction. So his group, Health Equality Campaign, Inc., was able to successfully lobby New Hampshire with Emily Phillips, the Sodi family, Julius, and Adrian, to get this on get this bill for a vote, pass the House. Now it needs to pass the Senate, which we'll be voting on soon. And if and when, fingers crossed, and as Tony said, you can always try again, try again. If and when New Hampshire passes the defunding, what we're going to see is predictable, like clockwork, the rates are going to go down, and more children are going to be protected. And as Samer said, it's not this may not be he didn't put it in these words, but it's not a silver bullet, it's a silver buckshot, right? So we just keep getting incremental wins, and then eventually we'll hit that tipping point. So in terms of intactivist victory scenarios, there are 3 that we were able to think of that are actually achievable in the immediate future, and they kind of play off each other. But the first victory scenario, and this is what happened with Obergefell, is let's say 14 states declared that it was a violation of equal protection under the law to only protect female children from medically unnecessary non-religious genital cutting. And so after a bunch of states protected all children equally, it comes up to the Supreme Court, they read the argument and say, you know what, it's time to move past this anachronistic barbaric practice that harms children and violates their right to bodily integrity. That's a very realistic scenario. It's happened in the past. Another thing that could happen tomorrow is RFK Jr. just says, you know what, we looked at the medical evidence and we're just not going to fund it anymore. If you want to pay for it, it's fine. Private insurers will stop paying for it because then they're not competing with the public government to provide this service of cutting off a big part of a child's penis for no medical reason. But it is very possible that this administration that has already defunded circumcision in Africa, the first time that I have ever seen the United States government defund genital cutting, defunds in the U.S. too. I mean, that's definitely within reach. And what we're seeing in Oregon and other states as well is that we just stopped doing it. As Sam said, we denormalize the procedure. So that's happened in Oregon. About 1 in 10 children are generally cut, and more affirmatively, 9 out of 10 children in the state are protected. So let's circle the square there and other states, and when we defund it, it's going to be, so if we were to defund circumcision, it would become denormalized, it would be easier to bring these lawsuits, and then maybe the Supreme Court would issue kind of a Obergefell-esque ruling, a landmark ruling saying all children are entitled to the right to their bodies, right? Their bodily integrity. So that is a very possible outcome, and that's what we're working to achieve, and we believe we can. We believe we can do it in the near future if the internet backs us, right? Because everyone here in this room is supporting us, but we need the global movement to come through. We need your help. So if you're watching on the live stream or afterwards, this is the time to support. And so beyond Oregon, as I mentioned before, we've raised $30,000 on the GoFundMe, and then we had another $30,000 so from the NCFM, GALDEF, and Doctors Opposing Circumcision. So we should thank you. We're going to say 60,000, not 30,000 from the GoFundMe, and when those checks clear, we'll thank you again. But we've been able to do an incredible amount of work with 30,000. This is high caliber legal work, and I've been a litigator. I've been litigating on my behalf of myself against Harvard before I was a barred lawyer, but for 5 years, and you cannot do the work that we did for $30,000. But we really care about this issue. We're very passionate. We're very capable and committed. But if we want to scale this up, we're gonna need support from the movement. So really, donations are very important. To kind of give you a sense of the cost of litigation, when I was at a boutique litigation firm, I cost $30,000 a month to maintain a litigation-heavy lawsuit. We could probably do it for $10,000 a month, depending on how intensive it is. We could maybe do it for less, but that's a good rule of thumb. So hypothetically, just giving you heuristics, right? If Intact Global was able to raise 1.2 million, maybe even $1 million, maybe even a little less a year, we could be suing 10 states at once. We could do an all-out legal, I would say, we're helping states change their laws on a mass scale, right? We're your friends, we're Oregon's friend, we're trying to protect children here, right? So although suing may be adversarial, and it certainly is when you sue hospitals and doctors, when you sue states, it can be a conversation. We're here to start a conversation. Why do we only protect girls in Oregon? Why don't we protect all children? And if we're raising 7 figures a year, we could sue 10 states at once, and we could move the needle like as quickly as marriage equality did once it got going. Now, what else do we need besides money? Obviously, resources are important, but we also need more plaintiffs, right? So we have great plaintiffs in Oregon. They really are leading the charge. And also the Moody brothers, Carter and Landon, who are not presently here, but we want to thank them as well. And obviously the Hadachek family, Cecil. So we need more plaintiffs. And we have potentially a plaintiff from Minnesota in the audience, but if you've been cut and you want to protect other children in your state, go to intactglobal.org, give us your information. That website has everything you could imagine. Our board member, Will Wong, who couldn't make it, did a phenomenal job making that. So reach out to us if you want to be a plaintiff. We need more attorneys, we need more paralegals, we need more legal man and woman power, right? Because the reality is, although Oregon may be friendly, there's definitely, most likely going to be opposition. We're going to want to counter that with other amicus briefs. We're going to have to brief a lot of issues. This is going to be a lot of work. If you read the 72-page complaint, you can imagine it was a tremendous effort from Peter and from Sammer to gather all of that authority, both Oregon local authority, global authority, and medical authority on the harms of medically unnecessary genital cutting. We're going to need healthcare professionals and other doctors. We have Lee from the audience, so great, but we need more doctors. We should be teaming with doctors with integrity, right? Those who aren't there to be like, oh, well, I make a quick $400 when I perform this medically unnecessary amputation. I mean, it's totally nuts. But in the vast majority of doctors do not do this, right? This is an incredible outlier position, as Deborah said in her conservative Jewish community in Los Angeles, like posing the question to them, how do you justify this position on scientific and medical grounds if you were an incredible outlier of all of the scientific and medical community, right? And then we're going to need volunteers, because even this event, if Justin's in the room, I mean, he did a wonderful, wonderful job in organizing it. Round of applause for Justin Bonner. We'll see you on the floor. There he is. Doing that. And there's, I mean, I could be up here thanking people all day, but they're about to take the hook out because I've been, But to wrap up, so today, yeah, we're in the Sentinel, beautiful hotel in Portland, Oregon. We got the complaint on file. Where we're kind of strategizing. We've had 2 great days. We're really in line, I believe. And so today, we may be, let's say, planning the attack on the Death Star, but tomorrow we go out with a press conference in Pioneer Courthouse Square. So we hope to see you there tomorrow.